go. Oh, okay, so we're on. I mean, I'm tempted to say you're very welcome, but it's not. It's nothing to do with me that you're all here. You know, knowing myself, Danielle, you know, had an idea a few years ago of just trying to preserve Irish music culture. And the first strand is, you know, capturing these oral histories, so we've been all around the country, talking to people who are in bands that we like, promoters who put on gigs, and people who ran record labels. So this is part of that process. But tonight is kind of extraordinary, but it's also quite moving because, you know, we're commemorating someone who meant a lot to us, even though in a lot of cases it was just some guy in a band who was really nice to us and was really kind, and he's not around anymore. So, you know, I think it's important to capture that. And I thought I'd start with a 2-minute quiz to see if you know anything. I don't know how you do. And I've written down a couple of questions. Does anyone remember who was the first band who played in the Underground? No, you don't, because you don't know. Tempted to give you a hint, but it'd be wasted on you. And the hint would be that it's the name of a Shakespeare play. So the first gig in the Underground, and it's great that we're doing this thing now, because it was 40 years ago, last May. And the first gig was a band called Tempest. And 3 people went. There were 4 in the band, so one of them had no mates at all. And Jeff remembered that the 3 fans spent the night eating crisps. And it was louder than the band. So if there are Tempest fans here, you're very welcome. The other thing that you might know about the Underground, it's on the site of the oldest restaurant in Dublin. In the 1700s, a license was given to start a restaurant at that exact spot. There was a restaurant called the Three Blackbirds. That lasted for quite some time, and then an oyster bar. I don't know where any of you were before you came here, but there was an oyster bar, and later, before the Underground started, there was a thing called the Subway. And that made me think, Jeff, you made no effort with the name. It was the Subway. Okay, the Underground. That was easy. You failed miserably at the first quiz question. I hope you'll do better at this one. What artist played the most? I've noticed a lot of train spotters in academics, so they'll know.
Well, I feel like it was Donnybrook Garret because I saw them about 10 times in the space of a year.
Okay.
But that could be just my memory.
No, well done. Completely wrong.
Sorry, somebody actually came to see us.
Yeah, that was okay. So the person who played there the most was Leo O'Kelly. Every Saturday afternoon. And it kind of got into his muscle memory, and I don't know how this happened, but they didn't tell him when it closed down. So he would go down to the Pillows every Saturday at noon and say, I'm playing. I'd say, no, it's not that kind of place anymore. I'd say, no, 1 o'clock, it's only an hour. So eventually they let him come in, and they would do kind of a slow set, and he would play, but you'd see these poor Latvian young ones, it's like, that guy's back. So Leo Kelly is the winner of that one. But the venue meant a lot. It was small, like it wasn't the most beautiful thing, but it meant a lot to people like me. I had been part of the music scene. My mate was the Ents officer in Trinity, and he finished his year as an Ents officer in the week that the Underground opened. And you know, I spent a lot of time there, and there was an incredibly decent sound engineer who would be really good to us and would listen to us and try and get us a good sound. Jeff was always really decent, unless you wanted a fifth. You know, if you could do 4 gigs in succession, but you couldn't do 5. That was illegal. So it was a very, very comfortable place. It was an incubation centre for a lot of incredibly talented people who wouldn't have found anywhere else the Ivy Rooms was too scary going down on Street. And you know, back in England was for people who had jobs or lives. So it really was incredibly important. And that's why we were delighted, you know, Dave, when you got in touch with us. And Dave will speak on this first one. And then Phil, who I remember Phil from his band, the Banished, I emigrated in 1989. And the Banished...
It was nothing to do with the band, I promise.
It was, though, you know. And, you know, the Banished were the band that I went to see the most before I emigrated. So I missed whatever happened after that. So this is a lovely way to kick off, because we're kind of remembering the people. And music scenes are different for everyone. Like, I don't actually believe in the idea of music scenes, because I think we all have our own. And Dave, like, I'm really intrigued, because you were born in 1989, were you?
Yeah, I was born in 1989.
So, like, what did you hear about this venue that wasn't around, you know, when you were?
I think growing up, playing in bands in Ireland, I started when I was 15 as a drummer and was playing in a lot of kind of the circuit at that point. And I think it was kind of, you'd always hear about McDonald. Well, first of all, my dad used to wreck my head talking McDonald all the time, and The Underground. So I was kind of brought up always hearing these names, but I think as through my teenage years seeing venues close, they'd always be compared to the old venues that you guys were around, you know? I love the history of these venues as well and what acts have come through over the years, so I'm really interested in that. So.
And, you know, was there any sense of the type of venue, or was it just, you know, the name and the myths? Like, did you ever see any photos? Because it was before people had cameras.
Yeah, I remember trying to find as many photos as I could to kind of put it in memory, you know, just to figure out what my dad had been telling me about all these years. But I never really got to see the actual gist of it, of course, because it was gone long at one stage. But yeah, I mean, there's still amazing stories online about the place and stuff, and again, I just love reading up about it.
And in terms of your musical education, because, you know, I'm of the age where any music that my parents liked, I hated. You know, I mean, you know, Dr. Doolittle may have been a great soundtrack, but you know, that was theirs. I wasn't the Clash or XTC.
Yeah, I had my dad playing Rudimentary Beeline every Sunday, or Crass, and then I moved into the two-tone era, so we were bombarded with this every Sunday, you know. I know it was ingrained in my brain essentially, so I definitely wouldn't be doing music without that.
And did you even make a decent attempt to hate that music when you were young, or did you, you know, did you embrace it, and then did that help?
No, I think being a rebellious teenager, I probably hated it, and then when I got older, I went, you know, that shaped me in so many ways that I didn't realise at the time. So yeah, looking back on it, it was a great experience, you know, and not many people kind of get that type of music thrown at you from an early age, so I'm very grateful for it, yeah.
And then what kind of, like, when did you start stealing records or buying stuff, you know? I don't know, the kids. You know, what kind of music was around, like, that you were bringing to someone who already had their taste?
I remember finding a big wicker basket of cassettes that my dad owned, and I remember going through them. I found a lot of Guernica, and actually I found a live Guernica cassette last night, believe it or not, and I think that was Live in the Underground. But I think the first cassette I found that blew my mind was, it would have been 96 or 97, the Rage Against the Machine self-titled album, and I remember listening to that and it took my head off, and I remember going to my dad and what is this, you know, and I learned so much because that, it was just so political, so different, so heavy, and it just made you angry. And I think that was the first turning point that I found on my own, you know, and yeah, that would have been the first cassette that I found and I thought, this is a keeper, you know.
And then were you going to get your own stuff? Like, at what stage did you start, you know, being a more active purchaser?
I actually don't really remember that. I remember going to the Golden Discs and ordering NoFX records and stuff from America because you couldn't get them here, and then you get them here and they'd be like £30 at the time because the import fees and whatever else. But yeah, kind of the punk scene of NoFX and the pop punk kind of stuff can't be buying my own.
And then the underground is well gone when you start going to gigs. So what's your live experience with music? When did that?
It would have been Eamon Dorns when I was 15. I remember one gig with this surf rock band I was playing with. The gig started at midnight, but I went in at 5 p.m. and just sat. I don't know if anyone remembers the old backstage room, there's an old bathroom. I just sat there for 7 hours, you know what I mean? Just no phone or anything, and then I'd have to go on stage, the bouncers didn't see me and then leave. So that was my first experience in music. But I think my dad had to do that as well, because he started playing when he was quite young. So yeah, that would have been my intro to Aim Adorns.
And then, because a lot of us just consume music and that, changed my life, that was enough for me. I had no reason to be on stage, but when did you go from listening from your dad to listening to your own stuff to thinking, I'm going to get up, like, I'm going to be an artist?
My dad used to always teach me drums, but the problem was, again, being a rebellious teenager, that my dad was so good at fucking drums that it would turn you off wanting to do them, you know what I mean? It was like, he was just so good, like, in 20 seconds he'd show you how great he was, and, but I did learn a lot from that, and more importantly, I learned from the rhythm. When we do the shopping, he'd always be tapping, and I got that from him, and honestly, without the rhythm, I don't think I would have been able to. Because there was one drum lesson I went to, it was maybe the first or second class, so I sat behind the kit and I learned how to actually play the drums. So I was practicing on sticks for years, playing along to misfits and stuff, and then I could actually play the kit. So I was very fortunate that I was kind of brought up with the rhythm aspect. And then I started playing. I played my first gig with a massive mohawk in front of my dad, in Cooke. And we had a song called F-U-C-K, OSF. And they warned us not to play it. We played it in front of a bunch of kids with their families, and we were told we were never going to get booked again in Darndale. You know what I mean? We were upset with that for so that was my first gig, yeah. And then I just progressed, and then I was touring in bands for 15 years as a drummer up until 5 years ago.
Yeah, and what intrigues me is that you're not just drawn on the punk. You're not just drawn on the kind of 70s and 80s. There's a lot of, to me, the best of hip hop is in there. So, where does that wide taste come from, and then how does that come out in your creative process?
With the Meryl Streek stuff, Michael, people are always asking me this about rap and hip hop. I've never listened to it in my life. Never listened to it, but it does have, Meryl Streek stuff does have a lot of elements of that, which is even surprising for me. But I don't know where that came from. I just wanted to do something completely different. The Clean Slate and Meryl Streek there was a promoter here in Dublin called Luke Gleason. He ran Retro Revival and several other nights, and he turned around. Before he passed away, one of his last words to me was, just do something different. And that's kind of where Meryl Streek sounded from. I was like, right, let's just do something so outrageous that people are going to be like, what the fuck is this, And that's what it's that's what it's led to. So
you're doing by that, what the fuck, and you're hating Darndale still. Yeah, banned from Darndale. Where does it go from here for you? Like, how far do you want to take this? 'Cause
when I signed with a publicist about 3 years ago, John used to manage Stevie Malone and Richard Hell, and I remember he asked me the same question, and I just said, I'm in it forever. You know what I mean? I'm passionate enough to want to do this, and I've made a lot of changes in my life to make this work, and yeah, I'm quite driven, and yeah, I'm quite, I know what I'm doing. I won't be stopping anytime soon, hopefully, yeah.
Okay, we'll bring you back in, but Phil, going back to this idea that we all have our own music scene, and sometimes you get really lucky because you get invited into it. And you had that situation with this really talented drummer.
Yeah, so my music scene in Dublin started in sort of 1987, 1988, was with David's father, Garret. And I was working in a local pub there, Niamh, who's sitting over there, and Miriam, who we had a local pub which I was working as a sort of lounge boy, serving pints. And David's dad, who was only a couple of years older than me, would come and sit down and we'd chat about music and that kind of thing. And a lot of you will remember Garret, and he used to have this ashtray haircut, so he'd have a very tight haircut with these spikes sticking out the top of his head, and everybody used to say that it looked like an ashtray, and he didn't give a fuck what anybody said about him. But he was the one who originally said to me, do you want us to come and see my band play? And I was 16, and I went, yes, I do. And that was my way into it, that was my sort of gateway drug. And as David says, like, you know, I started out as a drummer as well, and the only thing I learned from Garret was that I wasn't a very good drummer, and I went off playing bass instead, because it made more sense. But hanging around with Guernica and hanging around the Underground and hanging around with your father at that time was such an education in such a short space of time. Because the first time I went to see them in the Underground, we all remember, we went down the stairs, the stage was on the right-hand side, and everybody had to walk past the band to go to the bathroom. So automatically, they knew if you'd been at the gig or not, you know? And you'd go down there, and the first time I met Derek Lee and Derek Turner and Joe and Ray, and I was looking at, hang on a second, these are people whose mad doesn't still cut their hair kind of thing. It's the first time Northside Dubliners have ever encountered that. But then when you actually started to play, and you realise that this came from them. This wasn't cabaret music, it wasn't, you know, some lounge in Baldoyle where somebody was playing Tina Turner or Brian Adams. They wrote these songs themselves. And that just blew my mind. And once that happens to you as an impressionable teenager, like, you know, I scampered around like our dad, like a puppy for years, just trying to absorb all this, because not only was he a technically brilliant musician, but like you say, I think he sort of tested out some of the records on me that he subsequently passed on to you. And I was only saying it to my wife the other day, he was big into Ian Jury and the Blockheads, and New Boots and Panties album. He would sit you down. My father had a van with a tape deck in it, and we would borrow that. And we would, like, you know, he'd bring 2 or 3 tapes out of that wicker basket. I go, right, listen to this. Listen to what he's doing there. Do you get that? I said, I'll never be able to. Shut up. Listen to this. And he brought me through all those things. And it was the kind of music that you were listening to, the kind of music that Niamh was listening to, that you weren't seeing on Top of the Pops. And Ronan Collins certainly wasn't playing this. But it was crass. And not only was there a different musical dimension, but there was also a different political dimension to all those things. These were things that nobody really spoke about. But that combination of people creating things themselves, of having a sense of style, and having a sense of where they wanted to go with their music, exactly as you have now with your music, David, that just absolutely blew me away, and it changed my life completely.
Yeah, it's great to hear. And even you saying that about my dad, like saying, listen to this part, I remember he used to do that to me all the time. He'd be rewinding and fast forwarding on Bush live album from 1986, going, check out this part. You know what I mean? And yeah, that's man, it brings back memories, yeah, straight away.
There was one time he rang me one time and said, you're going to come up this evening. Occasionally, you know, we didn't have a whole lot of money, so you couldn't be going to the pub, like I did. I go, oh, you know, I've got a couple of cans of cider, a couple of flags or whatever, come on up, we listen to music, you know. And I was like, Dad, I don't know, you know, I was playing basketball the next day or something. He goes, listen, I'm after being sketching a drum kit, so when we get signed with Guernica, you know, I'm going to buy this drum kit from Music Maker. I want you to come up and have a look at it, you know. So I went up anyway, and knocked on the door of your granddad's house in Grace Park Meadows, and I opened, oh yeah, come on in, got 2 glasses, opened the flag and sat down. And he took out this sheet of A4 paper, and he goes, what do you think? I said, you joined Bon Jovi, or what the fuck is this thing with cymbals hanging over 2 bass drums? I don't really deadly. You'll never get that on the stage at the Underground. You know?
Yeah, that's one thing he hated me for. I only ever played a 4-piece kit, and we used to have arguments. He was like, just play the 1 kit 6. I was like, I don't want to. So that's one thing we didn't agree on was the kit style and how many. Yeah, but he was a massive fan of massive kits.
I also don't think he wanted any room for the other musicians on stage at all.
Yeah, and for any of you who were in the Underground, it was unbelievably small. And it was like something from a Western. You knew everything about a weak ladder in Dublin. Going to the loo was a perfect performance. And then there were these red, like, banisters, things like in front of the stage. And to make it worse, sometimes Jeff would put up a Christmas tree. The stage is small enough. But you found someone who wasn't looking for anything from you, who just like pulsed with the joy of music and thought, you're open to that, so I'm going to educate you. So what was your next move apart from following Guernica around?
So the next move was obviously to find people of like mind, you know, and it's amazing how you could be walking down the street a million times and you'll never see Whelan. So then you go to a gig here and it's the only thing you see when you pass by. And that was what the Underground and the Bag at the End and McDonald became to us then. And we had lads in school who said, oh, you know, I got a guitar, I'm doing this. There's another guy in the south end of town who had a bass. It's like, okay, just find a garage somewhere and start playing. And it doesn't matter how bad it was. Still to this day, I don't think your dad thought I was any use whatsoever. But he tolerated me because of the enthusiasm that I brought to it. You know?
That's half the battle. You know, that's the one thing that people want the most, is that drive to actually want to do it.
Exactly, just don't want to do anything, you know. And for all the great gigs we all saw in the Underground and the Banished and the McDonald, they couldn't have happened if we didn't have terrible bands doing the same thing as well, because we would have had nothing to measure up against. So the really good bands like Guernica, I was saying to them as well, like, I'll tell a couple of stories that I had never told before in public, but this one I did tell to your dad once. Guernica made, hopefully you've all listened to Auditorium on Spotify now, which came out in February after many years. I think it was 36 years after some of these songs were recorded. I'd heard that music because your dad played for me, and then the band just split up, and I was going, the biggest travesty of my lifetime was that nobody else was ever going to hear these songs. I thought this has to happen somehow, and Joe Rooney sent me one or two of the tracks and that, but I could still remember every note of them in my mind. But the music thing led me down a different path, and I remember I lived in Scandinavia now for 26 years, but I used to travel around playing Irish pubs in Germany, and I was in Braunschweig one night, and it wasn't like the lovely attentive audience we have here. There's Germans sitting there drinking pints, and they do not give one fuck who's playing or what they're playing in the corner. And sometimes we'd be sitting there we used to play 3 45-minute sets. It was like the Beatles, except shit, you know. And I was saying, I'm just going to entertain myself here. And one of the lads, David Hughes, who sang the Banished with us, he wrote a brilliant song. I played that, and nobody reacted whatsoever. And then I said, fuck it. And from memory, I played Duke Street. I just played it away, and very little reaction. There wasn't that many people in the pub. And then this beautiful German girl comes over, and she said, that's a fantastic song. She said, I've never heard that before. And I said, yeah, it's very good, isn't it? And she said, did you write that yourself? And I was this close, this close, but I couldn't. And I said, no, it was actually by a Dublin band girl. Brilliant. But I came back, and about 2005, 2006, I met your dad, and we were having a drink in the Johnny Beckerman pub, I don't know what it's called now, on Collins Avenue. And I was telling this story because I still, 15, 16, 17 years later, I still wanted you all to hear these fucking songs. It drove me mad that we never got the chance. And without that enthusiasm that he had for it, and that I had for it, and that you had for it, and that Joe Rooney and the rest of the lads had, it never would have seen the light of day. And now I'm just delighted. That's the whole reason I came here tonight, is to share the joy of the fact that music has finally made it out into the public tonight.
That's the beauty. I met Joe when I lived in Canada for like 7 years, and I came home and I met him at an electric picnic lunch, and I went up to Joe, and it was genuine. We had a photo together. I don't even share anymore because it looks like he's seen a ghost. You know what I mean? He was like, what the fuck? So I reconnected with Joe, we started chatting, and then I just was wrecking Pearl, Derek, and Joe's head to try and make this happen, you know, and then even contacting the older line of the Kieran and Al and stuff, and getting us all kind of thinking of like, and just, I hate art being lost, and one thing I absolutely despise, and I know it's like, not many people would agree, but working in 9 to 5, we've lost so many poets, film directors, musicians, because they don't actually get to do what their passion is and what they're good at and what they're here to do. So with the Guernica thing, exactly what you said, I didn't want to lose those tracks. And the same goes for any band, like any band at all that have an album out there from the 80s and 90s, they should be released. You know, I personally would be losing sleep every night if I hadn't been. So yeah.
I think that's a very important point. Sorry to get out and boot me off the stage now in a second, but just before we go there, there's so many brilliant stories. I've already met half the people are going to be on panels here this evening. And I travel over here from Stockholm, and I travel back tomorrow just to be here tonight to share this with you. Because we need to remember the magic that we all managed to create. I created a tiny little bit of it. The lads from Guernica created a huge amount of it, and you're still creating it to this day. But despite the 9 to 5, despite having to have the jobs and that kind of thing, we are still artists at the end of it, even if it's only a small part of us. And we have to remember in the fucked up world that we're living in, that that's the magic that brings us all together.
Absolutely.
And it's brought us all together here. I can't wait to hear some of the stories I've already heard at the side of the stage here. But if we take one thing from this evening, let that little bit of magic be it.
Yeah, you know, and we could talk for much longer, unfortunately, you know, the time isn't with us, but I think, you know, what I'm getting from this, there's an English actor who I really like called Mark Rylance, and he was doing an interview and he said, never ever forget how important it is for someone who's not a parent to take an interest in someone who's growing up. And I think that happened, certainly happened to me in the Underground and people who I met through music. It happened with you in an absolute, you know, the clear, now documented situation. So, you know, I'll just springboard on that when we wrap up this panel. You know, please take from tonight that I love your point that you made to me before the chat about you're really angry if art is lost. You think more people should have an opportunity to make art. So that's your job. It's my job to try and encourage people who you think, you know, are deserving of your support. So this has been an amazing moment for me to talk to Phil and Dave. So thank you so much.